Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and I just got my highest leaderboard placement of the entire season. I am currently, as of the time of recording, ranked number 5 in the entire world on the GO Battle League leaderboards, while using a Pokemon that basically no one believed in. Well, no one except my faction's teammate Absol Trainbest. He recommended that I try out King Gambit. King Gambit is a Dark and Steel type Pokemon. It doesn't have the greatest stats ever, but that typing proves to be an interesting core breaker to a lot of Fantasy Cup teams. I decided to test it out, and it went way better than I ever could have imagined. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and in game number 1, we pick up a dominant lead win, King Gambit into Morgrem. My opponent banks energy, save switches into Doublade, but Doublade is just simply not an answer to King Gambit. King Gambit's up energy Foul Play will hit for massive super effective damage, and King Gambit is already able to make Foul Play number 2. Foul Play is going to be no shielded by Doublade on the charge attack priority tie, and so far, everything is going very well for me. I will put up the shield. I'm going to go for a catch of Sacred Sword number 2 onto the Togetic, and then from here, if they stay in, they're just going to be fully Fairy Winded down. My opponent reveals their final Pokemon in the back is going to be Aegislash, and at this point, this game is a win. My opponent is triple weak to King Gambit, and King Gambit, at this point, should be able to sweep. I don't even really need the Togetic or the Giratina for this game, so I'm just going to fully sacrifice the Togetic as they fire off the Gyro Ball to pick up the one-hit knockout. Now I can send in the Giratina, and I'm very comfortable just fully committing to a farm down. If they make a move, I'll let the Giratina get KO'd as well, because I just simply do not need it. My opponent ended up going for a Gyro Ball there instead of a Shadow Ball, but either way, it's not going to matter. Back in comes the Morgrem, but how is Morgrem ever possibly going to get rid of King Gambit? Morgrem will fire off the Foul Play. King Gambit can survive it, but I have one Protect Shield left. I may as well use it. My opponent's only way back in the game is maybe to call a bait, so they try and call it just to get knocked out by the Iron Head, and we take the game 1 win. Hopping into game number 2, leading King Gambit into Alolan Sandslash. Now this matchup, as long as shields are up, is pretty decent for the King Gambit. King Gambit would usually rather see the Shadow Alolan Sandslash just because the metal sounds do quite a bit more damage. And with the Shadow, you can pretty consistently just fire off Foul Plays, where against the regular, you probably have to land an Iron Head. Here, I'm just going to overfarm slightly, playing to the CMP tie, and this way, if my opponent wants to get both of my Protect Shields, they're going to have to give up one of their own. They send in Turtonator, I immediately pivot out into Togetic. To my surprise, my opponent throws after only 2 Incinerates. This means they're on Brutal Swing Dragon Claw, and if they're staying in to throw Resisted Energy at a Togetic, then they must be incredibly weak to Togetic in the back. This Togetic is running Dazzling Gleam and Heat Wave. In my eyes, this is just strictly the correct moveset. I don't really get Psyshock on Togetic. It doesn't hit very hard. I'm not a very big fan of it. I correctly assume that my opponent's going to have to end up shielding, so I'm able to get away with a Heat Wave bait into a Giratina, into going for the Dazzling Gleam. Dazzling Gleam gets the final shield, and now I can just send back in King Gambit. They fire off Shadow Ball. King Gambit simply does not care, and King Gambit will be able to secure the knockout now with the Foul Play. Foul Play will easily be enough to knock out the Giratina. They're going to send back in Turtonator. Turtonator does get the farm down, but the bad news for Turtonator is that even though Dragon Claw will hit for super effective damage, it just simply fails to pick up the one-hit KO. So I know Shield, Giratina gets rocked, there's the switch into Togetic, we snipe down with the Fairy Wind, and take the win. We get the same leads in the next match, King Gambit into Shadow Alolan Sandslash. Again, I would much rather the Sandslash be Shadow just because the metal sounds add up so much throughout the course of this matchup. Sandslash will bait with the Ice Punch, a little bit unfortunate, but even with baits, they cannot hope to keep up with King Gambit's pacing. Foul Play does get the shield. I'm just going to look to farm up as much as possible. My opponent tries for a catch onto Azumarill, and this is where things could get a little bit tricky. This team, by design, is soft to Azumarill. I technically don't have a single Pokemon on this team that beats Azumarill. King Gambit definitely does not, because King Gambit can only hit for neutral damage, and Azumarill is very good at just out-neutraling things. However, if you have a decent Giratina Origin is actually able to survive a Play Rough from full HP, so after getting a little bit of chip, I send in Giratina, tank the Play Rough, and then make sure that I farm up to 100 energy. This ensures that I can knock out the Azumarill with the Shadow Ball, have a Shadow Ball for the Sandslash, and now I can pivot back into King Gambit. The reason I feel safe switch locking King Gambit is usually if it's Sandslash lead with Azumarill in the back, the final Pokemon is Giratina Origin, and they're just core broken by King Gambit. I Iron Head to ensure the knockout, there's the Giratina right on cue, and my opponent will concede the match. Picking up a slightly negative lead in the next match, King Gambit into Azumarill. My opponent safe switches into a Shadow Volt Switch Fortress, and the fact that they pivoted out of what is a good lead for them tells me this is probably the Rise to Occasion Legend team with Shadow Magnezone in the back. And if it is Shadow Magnezone in the back, then this game could get a little bit tricky, because my best answer to Shadow Magnezone is Giratina. Unfortunately, Giratina just barely misses the farm down, forcing me to expend energy as I Ominous Wind to take the knockout. I would love to save the Giratina, so I do just that as Azumarill comes in. And now I can send in Togetic. Unfortunately, on the Rise team, Azumarill is running Ice Beam instead of Play Rough Hydro Pump, but even though they have super effective damage, that's the power of Togetic. It is incredibly bulky. Togetic overfarms massively, firing off the Dazzling Gleam. Dazzling Gleam connects, and it is the Rise team as it's Shadow Magnezone in the back. I'm really hoping that this Volt Switch did knock me out here, but it didn't, and they're going to get a 3 Volt Switch energy head start. That is a pretty massive head start. In comes Giratina, racing to the Ominous Wind, but losing charge attack priority to the Magnezone. Magnezone will fire off the Mirror Shot. Mirror Shot is shielded, and this Ominous Wind will be able to grab the final shield from my opponent, and now it's time for King Gambit to try and close out the game. In comes King Gambit. I have to respect the Wild Charge. Wild Charge would just simply hit for way too much damage. They full send the Wild Charge. There's the switch into Azumarill. But the bad news for me is that Azumarill is still very, very healthy. I fire off Iron Head. Iron Head is going to connect onto Azumarill. Azumarill undertaps the Play Rough. But Play Rough, while it's going to do a lot of damage, will not take the knockout here. Now I have to try and overfarm as much as I possibly can on King Gambit. Does this put me 1 Metal Sound off the move? If it does, I win. If not, I have to transfer the damage. In comes Magnezone. We transfer the Volt Switch onto the Giratina, and that lets us make the foul play. We would have got farmed down, but we deferred the damage onto the Giratina. We make the move, and we get the win. We get the Dream Lead in the next match, King Gambit into Guzzlord. Guzzlord is completely walled. They save switch into Volt Switch Fortress, and unfortunately, I was pretty slow on the counter swap into Giratina. This means that I'm not going to make the Shadow Ball plus Ominous Wind double up before their second Rock Tomb, so it's a pretty sloppy gameplay for me, to be honest, but I still should be in a pretty good spot just because the Guzzlord doesn't really have anywhere to go against King Gambit and Togetic. The Guzzlord's only good matchup into my team is the Giratina. They'll fire off another Rock Tomb. That's going to be putting Giratina very low. I fire off the Shadow Ball, and my opponent catches onto a Doublade. Maybe they were anticipating an Ominous Wind, but bad news for them, they end up getting shredded by a debuff Shadow Ball. Actually, a double debuff Shadow Ball, and now I can just bring in King Gambit. King Gambit is going to have to commit shields because the threat of a Sacred Sword is very real. That's double super effective damage. The good news for me, however, is that it looks like in the 2s that I can just double shield and fully Metal Sound down. I fire off the Foul Play just to force the final shield away from my opponent, and yeah, there's just simply no way Doublade is ever making it to a 3rd Sacred Sword. That's going to force him to pivot out. Back in comes the Guzzlord. I have taken a decent amount of damage throughout the course of this match, but still, how are they going to get the remaining HP off of King Gambit? I fire off the Iron Head. I'm going to try and go for a very flashy catch, but my opponent is not going to let me go for it. Man, that's a little bit unfortunate. The good news is I will be able to make a foul play. King Gambit just making charge attack after charge attack after charge attack in this game. They can go for the Brutal Swing. It's simply going to fail to take the knockout. King Gambit still holding on. Back in comes the Fortress. I can't quite make it to the foul play, but I can send in Togetic, and Togetic will be able to close out the game. I was hoping to not have to reveal my 3rd, but we will have to show that we have the Togetic in the back. In comes Doublade. Doublade gets Fairy Winded down as well. We Fairy Wind down 2 Steel types and take the win. We see a very familiar lead in the next match, King Gambit versus Shadow Alolan Sandslash. There were a lot of A-Slash leads today, and a lot of them were very weak to King Gambit in the back, so even though a Drill Run does not pick up the one-hit knockout here onto King Gambit, I do like respecting it. Unfortunately, Alolan Sandslash really likes baiting King Gambit, so I end up shielding a heck of a lot of Ice Punch baits. But the good news here is instead of going for the Cap Tie, I actually decided to go for a Drill Run catch onto Togetic. This way, I can preserve the energy for later, and now my opponent reveals that they are very weak to Togetic in the back, as in comes a Shadow Giratina altered. I'm not going to bait. I'm just going to go straight for the Dazzling Gleam. Dazzling Gleam will be shielded, and my opponent can look to overfarm as much as they want, but I'm very okay letting Ancient Power knock me out. However, my opponent reveals they're not on Ancient Power, they're on Shadow Sneak, and because I have a very high ranked Togetic, I can survive the Shadow Sneak, make the Dazzling Gleam, and take the one-hit knockout. In the back is Azumarill. Azumarill probably would have been the better switch in for my opponent into the Togetic, but to be fair, Giratina doesn't really have a lot of play into this team anywhere, so now they're really going to have to try and sweep with the Azumarill. Azumarill can fire off energy, but King Gambit just simply does not care. It's only an Ice Beam as well, so that really does not do much. And now I can just send in the Giratina, and Giratina will always be able to outpace. pretty comfortable in the knowledge that if they're Ice Beaming me, then they're probably Ice Beam Hydro, and Ice Beam really does not do a lot to Giratina. But Giratina is just so far ahead at this point that even though it's not going to do much, I still will put up the shield, because I can always outpace them and make the Shadow Ball. There's a catch attempt onto the Sand Slash that they do not get, and that game is going to end in a win. So, Alolan Sand Slash plus Giratina proving to be a very common duo, and that's a duo that Kingambit really enjoys seeing. We get a pretty tricky lead in the next match, Kingambit into Togetic. Togetic is a core breaker for this team. It does very well into Kingambit, and it does very well into Giratina. Kingambit, however, does win the zeros by surviving the Heat Wave, so I will typically just end up no shielding and then returning fire with the Iron Head. If they end up shielding, that works out pretty okay for me. I'm just going to try and make another Iron Head here. My opponent pivots out into Doublade, but unfortunately Doublade does not get the Shadow Claw down, and I'm able to inflict huge damage with my Foul Play. The bad news for me is after landing the Foul Play, I immediately make a pretty large misplay by sending in Togetic. I could have sent in Giratina, farmed down, and never had to burn a shield. But now, I had to send in Togetic and fire off my energy immediately. The good news is, however, is it appears my opponent is pretty weak to Togetic, because they bring in their own Togetic, and the only real reason to do that is if you're pretty weak to Togetic in the back. I fire off Heat Wave, that will barely miss the knockout. Unfortunately, my opponent is going to make a last-second Heat Wave, and that is going to take the knockout. However, Giratina up a little bit of energy is very, very strong, and my opponent has their own Giratina in the back, so this game is over. I think in hindsight, what I probably should have done is after my opponent shielded the Iron Head on Kingambit, I could have just immediately switched into the Togetic Mirror, and then being up a shield, I would have been in a pretty good spot. Whereas I ended up getting a little bit lucky that my opponent didn't know the Iron Head counts and ended up trying to go for a catch before I had the move, because it looked like that they were actually going to be able to get that farm down. I do get a last-second boost in this game, but it didn't matter. The game was over anyway. We see a very nice lead in the next match, Kingambit into Morgrem. My opponent safe switches into a Shadow Waterfall Empoleon, and I will respond with the Giratina. Now here, they have so much energy, I feel like they absolutely have to put up the shield, and they make a savage bait call, and that's going to let them flip switch here. I was so confident. I was like, they have 70 energy on this Empoleon. They have to put up the shield, and they just destroy me with that bait call. Oh my goodness. Well, this is really not great. The good news for me is that I'm very strong into Morgrem ABA, so losing the switch isn't the end of the world, but man, that bait call was terrifying from my opponent. I now have all the energy I could ever ask for on Kingambit. My opponent reveals they have Aegislash in the back. Oh no. And this is just Kingambit absolutely popping off, as Kingambit is going to make foul play after foul play after foul play into the Aegislash. Aegislash will fire off energy. Even though I do resist both Shadow Ball and Gyro Ball, Aegislash in its blade form hits for absurd damage, so I put up the shield, and then I immediately fire off the Iron Head. The Iron Head being thrown at a Steel type seems a bit odd, but I was expecting them to try and go for a catch onto Morgrem. So I wanted to cover for a catch onto Morgrem, so that way Morgrem didn't catch a double resisted foul play. Foul play is going to be getting Aegislash very low. I make it to another foul play as well, and Kingambit is just absolutely shredding. Kingambit actually winning charge attack priority there over the Aegislash. Aegislash will fire off another Shadow Ball, but they're going to have to pivot out into the Morgrem, and Morgrem just simply does not have any energy. It's going to be a race, Kingambit making it to the Iron Head, and we're not going to have to show our third. Iron Head picks up the one-hit knockout onto Morgrem. Back in comes Aegislash just to get Metal Sounded down, and oh my goodness, Kingambit is going on a rampage. We pick up a very bad lead in the next match, leading Kingambit into Shadow Flygon. Now this is a weak spot for the team. Obviously, Togetic is the hardest Flygon answer in the meta, but Kingambit and Giratina are both going to struggle here. I'm deciding that I want to try and stay in and play out this matchup. I do get Twister baited, but I'm hoping that I should be able to make the foul play before they're able to make their Scorching Sands. This, however, is when I learned that a Twister plus a Scorching Sands is exactly 10 mud shots of energy, so I have made a pretty massive error, and I end up losing my entire Kingambit. Thinking back on it now, it makes perfect sense. Twister is 40, Scorching Sands is 50, Mudshot is 9, so it's 9 into 90, which is 10. But in the moment, I wasn't doing that math, so I was shocked when my Kingambit got KO'd. I'm able to take the knockout onto Empoleon. Back in comes Flygon, and if there's any chance in the game, I think it's going to be by shielding and committing to a farm down. If Flygon makes another Twister, the game is over, but they do not. In the back, what do they have? It's a Fortress, and I'm actually going to win. I can just make double Shadow Ball and then switch and Heat Wave, and there's just nothing they can do. Somehow, despite losing our entire Kingambit for free at the start of the match, Giratina Origin takes all 3 knockouts, and our winning ways continue. We've seen Kingambit lead into Togetic, and now we get to see Kingambit lead into Togekiss. Now this matchup definitely plays a lot differently, because in the 2s, Gambit can Metal Sound down, which it can't versus Togetic, but Aura Sphere also picks up the one-hit knockout. My opponent grabs shield advantage, save switches into Empoleon, but this is a Metal Sound Empoleon, it's not Waterfall. And because it's not Waterfall, they have basically no fast move pressure here. Gambit doesn't have a lot of bulk, but I do have a very good Gambit. It is a rank 15 Gambit. So I'm just going to trust that my Gambit is going to survive this Hydro Cannon. Come on, Gambit. Hydro Cannon lands. Gambit survives. The high rank Gambit paying massive dividends as we take the knockout with Foul Play. My opponent can now send in their final Pokemon, which is Turtonator, and I immediately pivot out, not giving them that farm as I send in Togetic. Have to respect the potential overheat from the Turtonator. There it is. Turtonator going to be forced to pivot out, and in comes Togekiss. I'm just going straight for the jugular here as I fire off the Dazzling Gleam. I want to take the knockout. Oh, but it doesn't take the knockout. Togekiss survives on 1 HP, and they're able to leave a parting gift of a Psyshock. Psyshock will get me pretty low. Back in comes the Turtonator, and I'm going straight for the Dazzling Gleam. This will either hit for big damage, or it's going to pressure that final shield. I'm able to get big damage, and now I can just send in the Giratina. And Giratina's ability to survive 1 Dragon Claw at full HP has been invaluable throughout these battles, as Giratina will just get the full farm down, and my opponent will resign the match. Picking up a very bad lead in the next match, Gambit into Shadow Magnezone. Now, we've seen Shadow Magnezone in the back, but seeing it on the lead, this is going to be a very tricky game to play out of. I fire off the Foul Play. Foul Play doesn't take the one-hit knockout here, but it will inflict some pretty massive damage, so my opponent will put up the shield. I'm anticipating my opponent will go for the correct play, which is Wild Charging, so I do put up the shield, and now my Foul Play will be lethal, so my opponent will be forced to give up the final shield. But they're going to get a full farm down, and that is quite scary, because Magnezone energy does go very far. I send in the Giratina, my opponent pivots, and they send in Florges. I'm really hoping that this Florges is on the double small move set of Chilling Water and Trailblaze. I'm hoping it's not Disarming, and I'm hoping it's not Moonblast. They throw on 5. Please don't be Disarming. It's Disarming, and that's very bad news for me. I send in Togetic. Togetic can't quite get the farm down there, as they will leave a parting gift of a Chilling Water. So now I'm debuffed on the Togetic. My opponent can't really afford to send in the Magnezone, so they send in their final Pokemon, which is Dragonite, and I make a massive error. I throw way too soon. I should have fired off the Dazzling Gleam. I just didn't think in my head debuffed it would knock out, but of course it would knock out. It's a Shadow Dragonite. But what I had to do was farm up to 100 energy, which is a Heat Wave plus a Dazzling Gleam, and then I would have been fine. But I didn't, and now back-to-back Wild Charges knock me out, and I just get fully swept by Magnezone. Hopping to the final match, we get the Dream lead, leading into Shadow Giratina with Gambit. And the Giratina is staying in this matchup. I farm up, fire off the Foul Play just for them to catch onto Galarian Weezing. Very nice catch from my opponent. They are very, very core broken by Gambit, but they're doing a very good job of managing it. Now, the question with Weezing always is, do they have Overheat? If they're switching it into Gambit, surely they must actually have it. So, I'm going to bank energy and then go for a catch onto my own Giratina. Is this the Overheat? Yes, it is, and that proves to be a very nice catch. As now I should just be able to fully farm down, but no. Switch timer's up, and back in comes Shadow Giratina. Shadow Giratina fires off the Shadow Sneak. Shadow Giratina as a whole is a very bulky Pokemon, but with the Shadow, it's a lot glassier than one might think. So I go for the Ominous Wind, and apparently it's not glassy enough because they survived the Ominous Wind. I should have just Shadow Balled, and I get knocked out by an Ancient Power. They get a boost, but all that does is just give a little bit of extra damage over to Gambit. Back in comes the Weezing. Weezing's going to be losing charge type priority to the Gambit. Weezing puts up the shield. It actually wasn't a charge type priority somehow. And now I'm just going to shield because the Metal Sound that goes through should take the knockout. They go for the Sludge. In the back is Empoleon. And at this point, I should have a pretty guaranteed win condition. That's by firing off the Foul Play and then pivoting into Togetic. Because my opponent's going to have to throw 2 Hydro Cannons to get rid of the Togetic. I've already done enough damage to them where Heat Wave will basically knock them out. So they're forced to fire off the Hydro immediately here on the Charge Attack Priority tie, and the moment they do that, the game is over because now they don't have the residual energy needed to outpace Gambit. So I definitely got outplayed in that final game, but our team comp advantage was so severe that we were able to win anyway, as Gambit takes down Empoleon, and we get the win. Bit of a longer video today, but I really enjoyed running this team, so I wanted to include as much footage as I possibly could. I do think that for Gambit, you do need a very high rank Gambit. It is not a tanky Pokemon, so every little bit of bulk that you can get will be helpful. Gambit definitely falls under more of an anti-meta mon, where it's not one of like the hard meta Pokemon that you can just use day in and day out to climb. but I felt like it was a really good core breaker to today's meta. King Gambit caught so many teams off guard, whether it was Alolan Sandslash plus Giratina, whether it was Morgrim plus Doublade. There were a lot of teams that just weren't really factoring in that combination of Dark plus Steel, because who's crazy enough to run a King Gambit? Well, I guess the answer is me, and it paid off massively as I was able to climb all the way up to 3091 Elo and number 5 in the entire world. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed watching it, please do help support the channel by leaving a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and an extra special thank you, as always, to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so appreciated. Thank you guys oh so very much, and until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.